Is trust something that's important to you, to your business, to your brand? If it is, I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking to you a little bit about trust, how to build trust, what are the key components, and maybe even to some extent why trust matters. So I hope you'll hang around. If you're interested in this, click the subscribe, and let's go forward. So I think for everyone, trust is something that is a word that gets tossed around a lot, and we don't really know the definition of it, or it's hard to define. So I took the time. I looked at this author. His name's Meyer. There was three authors: Meyer, Davies, Sherman, and they have a really cool definition: the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party, based on the expectation that the other party will perform a particular action important to the trustor, the person trusting the trustee. So when I see trustor, I'm like, will I trust or will I not trust? And so that's the person when we talk about trustor. So will they perform a particular action important to the trustor, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party? In other words, I can't know for sure or not whether or not this person will actually do those things that I want them to do, but I have to just have faith that they will do them because I can't monitor them, I can't control them, and that's what trust is all about. So the foundations for this little talk is basically two main sources. One is an integrative model of organizational trust by those authors who gave us that definition, Myers, Davies, Sherman. And the other is by a really awesome guy. His name's Jeff Hawkins. He wrote the book called On Intelligence, and he's now with a company called Numenta, and really is super fascinating work that he's doing there, and just around the brain. And if we're going to ever get a handle on artificial intelligence, we first have to figure out how the brain works and then apply the biological understanding to what we're having our computers do. And that's fundamentally the mission. So again, when we look at an integrative model of organizational trust, it's a model of trust of one individual for another. And what I like about On Intelligence, it sort of teaches us how we learn. So on Intelligence, in the book On Intelligence, Jeff Hawkins talks about this idea of classify, sequence, pattern, prediction is basically all that there is to the brain. So all of your memories, all of everything, how you learn, why you do the things you do, why you have the behaviors you do, is fundamentally based upon classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. Now, there's also your kind of lizard brain, shall we say, where it's going to make those fundamental decisions like breathing, but your higher level thinking is coming through classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. And so if your higher level thinking tells your body, hey, I'm going to hold my breath, you can hold your breath, but only until a point where the lizard brain kicks in and goes, hey man, I don't think it's a good idea anymore. And you start to breathe again, maybe you passed out, and then basically your biology takes over. So just keep that in mind, that this is your higher level thinking. And even Jeff Hawkins gave the example of, you might see a delicious piece of cake and say to yourself, can't do it. I'm cutting back on carbs. I'm watching my calories. I'm not going to do it. And then your lizard brain kicks in and goes, man, that looks good. And before you know it, the pie's gone or the cake's gone. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there's kind of these two competing brains within you. But this is for sure how you can teach your higher level brain stuff. And so the whole idea of Jeff Hawkins on intelligence, in my opinion, was this idea of classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. And he says most of your memory is a sequential memory. So basically you're recognizing patterns over time. And that's something that Scott Adams, I think, talks about as well in terms of patterns. So if I gave you an example of that and I asked you to fill out in the comments below, what if you could fill in the blank, C blank T, what would you fill in? Go ahead, put it in the comments. I'm sort of curious. I'll get back and have a look at that. But I think you'd make a prediction, wouldn't you? You'd make a prediction based upon all of the patterns that you've seen before, maybe they're your most familiar patterns, but you probably are making a prediction right now. Whether or not you leave a comment, you're still going to make that prediction. So here's the second example. Can you predict the next two blanks? So if I said to you, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, 4, 5, 6, D, blank, blank, could you fill in the blanks? And here's the question. How confident are you about those two blanks? Are you more confident in filling in the second two blanks than you were the first blank? So again, when we start to think about how the brain works in terms of confidence in our predictions, we have different levels of confidence based upon our previous experiences, patterns, and what we've been exposed to before. So I have another question for you. This is more around cognitive dissonance. Have you ever felt sort of a mental discomfort? Just like, that can't be real. Or maybe you're experiencing something, I'm not sure that this is real or not, right? So that cognitive dissonance sometimes we'll hear about is that mental discomfort from holding two conflicting beliefs. And so I'll give you an example of that. So let's say you're driving down a beautiful road. You're in the right-hand lane because the left-hand lane's for passing. The speed limit is 105 kilometers per hour or 65 miles per hour. You're cruising along at the speed limit. Maybe even you're going a couple kilometers faster, a couple miles faster because that's just how you roll. In the left-hand lane in front of you, there's a car going 60 kilometers an hour, 30 miles per hour. Who's behind the wheel? Who's behind the wheel? Think about that. Hold that, write it down even for yourselves. Who's behind the wheel? All right, so you pull up next to him, you look over, and there's that person that you just wrote down. It's exactly what you said. Maybe you said, it's a senior citizen. You look over, and it's a senior citizen, and you're like, I knew it. These guys, not great drivers. Selective reinforcement. So then you go ahead, you cruise down the road a little bit more, you're back up to your 105 kilometers per hour. There's another person or 65 miles per hour. There's another person in the left-hand lane going about 60 kilometers an hour or about 30 miles per hour. And you say to yourself, man, what's this person doing? And I ask you, who's behind the wheel? Who's behind the wheel? Write that one down too. So you cruise up next to them and you look over, and it's not who you wrote down. It's someone just like you behind the wheel of that other automobile. What's going on there? Why is this person going half the posted speed limit in the left-hand passing lane? Write that down. If you said because they're texting, they're drunk, they're high, what you've done is you've distorted what you're actually seeing, selective distortion, so that you didn't have to change your prediction about how people like you drive. Interesting, hey? So in the first example, where it reinforced your preconceived notions, your pattern, your prediction, you were like, yeah, I knew it. In the second example, where it did not, you probably did in some way distort that. You distorted it in a way that you didn't have to change your preconceived notions. Isn't that fascinating? Classify, sequence, pattern, prediction. And this is why once we make a prediction about something, it can be very hard to change it, because changing it creates this cognitive dissonance in our minds, where do I have to change this? I don't want to change it. I created this mental rule of thumb. It works well for me. I really don't want to change how I think or these patterns and these predictions that I'm used to. Very important point. So let's go back to that Myers, Davies, and Schurman, the integrative model of organizational trust. And again, part of the reason why I bring this up is because this has been a study that's been cited, according to Google Scholar, about 22,719 times as of today's date. And so it's been cited a lot. And so this is a scholarly article that has been basically determined to be a good source of information. And so I like that. I like the fact that other scholars have looked at this and decided that, yep, this is actually a very, very important document. Within this document, they give you this for a proposed model of trust. And it's basically, to break this down, this is around the trustor. Now remember I said the trustor is the person who's deciding whether or not they are going to trust. Will I trust or will I not trust? That's the trustor. Cool. So when a trustor is looking at a trustee, the person who they're about to give their trust to determine whether or not they're going to trust that person, the trustor is looking for three key factors: ability, benevolence, and integrity. And I think that's really important to understand as we start to think about what is the messages that we want to be sending out in order to build trust. And that's why this model is so important. And if trust is important to you, and it probably is no matter what you're doing, these are the three key factors to focus on. Now, there is a propensity to trust or not. So some people are more trusting, some people are less trusting by their nature. Irregardless of that, anyone who's about to trust will still look at these three factors. And that's what this model is teaching us. Basically, they're going to be looking for these three factors. So let's break that down for a second, because I think it's really important to understand these three factors. And again, this is just my interpretation of some really important works. I encourage you to go back to the original source and read them in the context in which they were written, both on intelligence and this document. But let's look into the ability for a second. Ability is that group of skills, competencies, and characteristics that enable a party to have influence within some specific domain. The domain of the ability is specific because the trustee may be highly competent in some technical area, affording that person trust on tasks related to that area. However, the trustee may have little aptitude, training, or experience in another area. For instance, in interpersonal communication. Although such an individual may be trusted to do analytic tasks related to his or her technical area, the individual may not be trusted to initiate contact with an important customer. Sound familiar? Yeah, you might know some folks in your organization who are fantastic at what it is they do kind of behind the scenes. Would you put them in front of the customer? Maybe, maybe not. So this was the other example I'd give you is, let's say your lights aren't working. Let's say your power goes out in your house. Are you going to fix it yourself? Well, you might try to do it yourself, but you'd probably want to get an experienced electrician in to look at that. Somebody who's probably got some certifications. Same thing with when you break a bone. You might want to have that looked at by a doctor, a person with some kind of a medical expertise. And by the same token, I would not necessarily want the doctor to work on my electrical components within my house, nor would I want my electrician to review my x-rays and make recommendations or perform a surgery on me. Get it? So that's all ability is about. It's pretty straightforward, but it's a key component when we're looking at trust. The second component is benevolence. So benevolence, the extent to which a trustee is believed to want to do good to the trustor aside from an egocentric profit motive. In other words, does the person have your best interest at heart? At least that's the way I look at it. And so I give you the example of the gym. You might have a workout buddy, and the workout buddy calls you every day before your workout and says, okay, time to go. And you're like, oh man, I hate this. I don't want to go, blah, blah, blah. But I know that person has my best interest at heart. I know that person wants the best for me. I'm going to believe them. I'm going to go and I'm going to do this thing because I know they have my best interest at heart. And so that's an example of actually having your best interest at heart. I put a question mark there because, can you guys leave a comment below about a time where maybe somebody didn't have your best interest at heart? what would be an example of that where basically you've learned that somebody does not have your best interest at heart, and so therefore you don't trust them because you feel they don't have your best interest at heart? Benevolence. The next step, or the next component, is integrity. And integrity is fascinating to me because this is more like a historical long view in my mind, and being consistent in your actions and behaviors. So the way that Meyer, Davies, and Sherman describe it is the relationship between integrity and trust involves the truster's perception that the trustee adheres to a specific set of principles that the trustor finds acceptable. Such issues as the consistency of the party's past actions, credible communications about the trustee from other parties, belief that the trustee has a strong sense of justice, and the extent to which their party's actions are congruent with his or her words, all affect the degree to which the party is judged to have integrity. So I give you the example of this fellow wearing this hat, love your neighbor. And so that's something where over a long period of time, there might be an example of, hey, is this person a good person? Is this person a loving person? Is this person care about our community? Have they consistently done that over their lives? And this is another key component of trust. So again, we can even be informed about this by other parties. And that becomes super powerful when we think about social media, when we think about what people are saying about us, what people are saying about our brand. So just keep that in mind in integrity. Now, I want to show you a little bit of the trust math equation here. In my mind, ability, benevolence, integrity actually multiply together. And as long as you've got some component there, and you can try this in your own Excel spreadsheet, but let's say your ability, I'll give you the example of 100%, 100%, 100% here. Let's say that the ability drops to, let's say the ability drops to 25%. So you know the person's got some experience, but not a ton of experience, but they're still pretty good at what it is they do. Let's say benevolence drops to 50%. So I don't know this person very well, but I still think they kind of have my best interest at heart. And integrity, while this person's been in the community for a long time, and therefore I think that I trust them a lot. So I give you 100%. So even at that, even got 0.25 times 0.5 times 100, you're still going to come up with a positive number towards trust. It won't necessarily be 100%, but it'll be above zero. The reason why I think this math is really interesting is because if any of these components drop to zero, your whole propensity to trust that person drops to zero. And I think that's a critical component. If somebody sees that, again, you might be the nicest doctor I've ever met. You might be a good friend of mine. And I've known you, we grew up together, so I trust your integrity. I trust you've got my benevolence in terms of my best interest at heart. But I'm still not going to hire you to do my electrical work because I know you have no ability when it comes to do electrical work. Therefore, my trust for you doing the electrical work would drop to zero. So I hope that makes sense. But something to keep in mind is that we have to work on all three of these. Where we can control the message, we want to have a consistent message that demonstrates these three things. And this is where I think in social media and wherever you can connect with people, that you focus on these three key messages and be consistent about sending them out, be consistent about demonstrating those three things in order to build trust, because over time, that's the best way to do it. The other component is that when we think about how we learn, once we've established that pattern, remember we talked about cognitive dissonance, selective distortion, selective retention. Those are key components because if you are able to establish trust through demonstrating ability, benevolence, integrity, particularly through your communication messages or just in general. If you're able to establish trust, then somebody will have that prediction that you're trustworthy. Oh, I know that person to be of good ability, and they've got our best interests at heart, or they've got my best interests at heart, and I know they're a good community member speaking to their integrity. And so if you are able to establish that trust through social media, through your communications, that's powerful. You know, they use the expression, you can only make a first impression once. This is exactly scientifically what they're talking about. And so I've introduced you to LinkedIn, and in your LinkedIn messages, in your Twitter messages, in wherever you can control the message, I would encourage you to focus on those 3 key components. Demonstrate your ability, demonstrate your benevolence, that you have the other person's best interest at heart, demonstrate your integrity, your character, your history of doing good things, and you'll very likely build trust. And once you establish that trust, even if it's asynchronously with somebody who you've never met, that prediction about you, that mental rule of thumb that person has made about you, it'll be very difficult to undo. And that's extremely important to remember. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Please subscribe. I plan on kicking out more of these videos as I go along. And yeah, hopefully this has been a help to you. Thank you very much.